Hey y'all, Jay Wilson here from Onyx Reporting. I'm the lead data strategist and BI consultant on our team here at Onyx. And today I'm going to be talking about a tool that I use for my BI projects, TimeXtender's data warehouse automation platform. This presentation in particular would take a look at multiple environments. And because it's part of my DWA Done Right series, you'll hear a blend of both feature reviews as well as best practices that I've kind of picked up from some of the projects, the TimeXtender projects that I've done in the past. The concept of using multiple environments to separate the live reporting environment from the dev environment is by no means a new one. It's very much common practice. And the way you'll frequently see that implemented is in the live environment, you'll have the functional data warehouse that the organization goes to for all of their reporting and analytics needs. And when it's time to implement a new feature, that work will be done in, of course, the development environment. Now, usually that dev environment will work with a truncated data set, right? As a developer, I don't really want to sit around and wait for 7 years worth of transactions to process while I'm developing a new model. So usually I'll just work with, 3 months or even a week's worth of data. Once I'm relatively confident in that model, I'll say, okay, it's time for the quality assurance, the UAT team to take a look at it. So I'll push that project definition into a test environment. And in that test environment, maybe we'll open up and actually consider a broader range of data so that the QA team can take their existing reports, validate that the numbers are right, and also, of course, look at edge cases. Edge cases being, if there's any complex data manipulation going on, seeing what happens with outlier data and addressing what happens with outlier data. Once the user acceptance team puts their stamp on that data model, we'll then take that project definition and push it into production. Right? That process, that workflow is by no means new. One thing that is kind of new or interesting is this idea of production and exploration, as advocated by TimeXtender's Data Discovery Hub model. So in production, you now have users looking at both a conformed Kimball star schema data warehouse, as well as looking at what we'll call the operational data store. Now, the operational data store takes raw data from all of your source systems, whether it's your e-commerce site, your ERP, your CRM, your MailChimp, Google Analytics, what have you. It takes all of your raw data and just kind of dumps it into this big old database. From there, an organization that has a team of data scientists or data analysts, they can take that data and then, perform experiments with it. Or alternatively, if your visualization tool doesn't require a structured data warehouse, we've seen other organizations point their visualization tool directly at a data store. Now, I'm not here really to debate the pros and cons of that model, but we're seeing more and more organizations ask for a playground where the business can perform data mashups, where they can experiment with data using various tools. And again, it is in the live environment. It is live, but it's not structured the way we see in a traditional data warehouse. In any event, as we start talking about separating production from development, there's also some other best practices that go with it, starting with separating the whole BI reporting endeavor, separating that from your transactional, your operational systems. So I guess the easiest way to describe it is you'll literally have a separate server for hosting your staging database and data warehouse, and it'll be physically separate, or at least logically separate, from the server that hosts nav. And that's really important, especially in organizations that run 24 hours, because when I do a deploy and execute phase, when I'm extracting data from nav and I'm transforming it to fit it into the data warehouse, that's very memory intensive. And we don't want to take system resources, physical system resources, away from your users that actually have to do work in nav, because it slows down the system. And actually part of configuring your data discovery hub is to find ways to make it interact with your live nav as little as possible. Okay, so that was piece number one. Separate your reporting environment from the production systems. In actually ideal worlds, we would separate development and testing from our live reporting environment. And the concept is the same. Again, if I'm doing a lot of work in development, that could be very system intensive. And again, we don't want to take resources away from people who are doing reporting and analytics. In organizations where you only have a small team of 2 or 3 or 5 people at most at any given point interacting with the live data warehouse, right? That's not as big a deal. But as you start having a multiple gigabyte cube where you have people interacting with your live data, right, that becomes a different issue. I wanted to take a sidestep for a moment and talk about project administration and compare how we did it historically versus how it's handled in TimeXtender. Traditionally, you would handle project administration using version control. You would handle version control using GitHub or Visual Studio Team Services or some arcane blend of third-party tools. And of course, these tools were designed specifically for version control. And so to me, it's no surprise that these tools tend to be more robust than the version control offering in TimeXtender. In TimeXtender, it's kind of all or nothing. You can pick a version of the project, of the entire project, and you can say, this is what I want to restore, or this is what I want to work with, this is what I want to transfer from dev to testing to production. But it is not possible to say, well, I only want to restore this piece of the project. You can't just pick, oh, I like what I did on this table, so I just want to restore this piece of the project definition. It's all or nothing. I did want to take another little side note to say that project execution, however, in TimeXtender is much easier. It's no code. You don't have to learn PowerShell. You don't have to learn SQL agent. It's just it's a GUI, so you just pick the right thing and it deploys and executes in an automated way. The last bullet I wanted to hit when we're talking about project administration in the TimeXtender model is to make sure that you're backing up the project repository. If you take nothing away from this presentation today, please walk away with, I need to make sure that the project repository is currently being backed up, because this is where all the money goes. All of the development work gets stored in the project repository. So literally, if you took your staging database and data warehouse and dropped them, delete them, as long as you have the project repository, you could go back to the project definition and say, this is what I want the staging, this is what I want the data warehouse to look like, push the deploy and execute button, it will recreate those databases. But if you delete the project repository, you lose the definition for what a project is. So you lose all of the money and time and effort that has gone into customizing your data warehouse. So please make sure that's being backed up. Okay. We already went over this idea of having multiple environments. I introduced the idea that you could use variables to control how much data is being moved into your dev environment, right? We said it's not really important to have all of the data. You know, if I am in dev, it makes sense to just use the last 7 days or the last month worth of data. You would implement this using project variables. The two project variable types that you would need is you'd need a dynamic variable that lets you know what today's date is. So you would use a getDate variable. And then you would use a system variable that lets you identify the environment name. So just to step through how this would look like, on your data selection, at your data source, you would create a data selection rule that says, I only want to extract data where the modified date is greater than, and here's where you would put your get date. But I only want to apply this data selection rule if I'm in the dev environment. If I'm in any other environment, testing or production, I want to ignore the rule and of course extract all the data. This is just one example of how you can use project variables. If you've worked with parameterizing SSIS function or SSIS packages, then of course you know that there's many other ways that you could take advantage of project variables. But this is how it applies to the context of multiple environments. Additionally, within multiple environments, there's this idea of data sources, right? When you take a project and you say, okay, I need to move it from dev into production, I also need to define where is my staging database, where is my source data, and where is my data warehouse. In SQL Server, you will literally have two staging databases, one for dev, one for production. You'll literally have two data warehouses, one for dev, one for production. You'll probably have the same SQL data source for your transactional data, right? It's still going to come out of nav, but earlier we learned that we can use a data selection rule that conditionally applies based off of the environment. In any event, we'll use global data, a series of global data sources to define when I'm in a specific environment, where does my data come from and where does my data go to? Lastly, of course, as we talk about multiple environments, we want to make it as easy as possible to transfer a project definition from development into testing and from testing into production. And so we have a transfer feature. And if I were to do it manually, what it's literally doing is it's taking an XML definition and it's transferring it from one SQL database, project repository dev, into another SQL database, project repository production. Right? So while this is, you are able to do this with as an automated feature, you could also recreate this effort manually if you aren't using the multiple environment tool. Of course, in addition to transferring a project from one environment to another, it is possible to automate the remote deployment and execution of a project. So I can automate, yeah, I want the updates to occur every night, say. One caveat to automated deployment, though, is this idea of version control. If I'm working in sprints and I do a bunch of work to implement, say, historical aging, and I'm ready to send it off to testing in UAT, I might say, okay, well, this is version 3.1, a major release of the dev project, and that's what I want to send over. And after that, I might do subsequent work on a different area of development. I can choose which version of the project gets migrated to prevent the deployment of untested work. So that takes us to the end of our presentation. We were talking about working in multiple environments using TimeXtender's data warehouse automation tool. And for those of you who've been along for the ride, right, you probably haven't seen anything revolutionary or new, right? This idea of separating development and testing and production not exactly new. And the use of project variables and dynamic variables to control what data gets moved depending on what your environment you're in. This is, familiar territory for the seasoned SSIS veteran. The use of GitHub and version control to manage your version control, right? Again, this is not necessarily new or revolutionary, but what is exciting is that TimeXtender is one product, one tool that takes all of these different elements and kind of mashes it up together and makes it accessible to less seasoned BI developers. In any event, that's the end of our presentation. My name is Jay Wilson. I'm the lead data strategist and BI consultant at Onyx Reporting. You've been listening to me present on multiple environments as part of my data warehouse automation series, Done Right. And it's all in preparation for longer presentations that Onyx Reporting is going to be giving in the coming years. So thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again soon. Cheers. Bye.